He was 70 years old when the question finally stopped letting him sleep. Not Elvis's question, his own. For decades, Jerry Schilling had learned to live with the memories that came with being one of the few people who saw Elvis Presley without the spotlight, without the cape, without the mask. But there was one night, one conversation, that he could never quite file away with the good stories and the funny pranks. It was late. The house was quiet in that strange way only Elvis's houses could be, expensive, beautiful, and yet somehow lonely. Elvis had just finished scanning another cruel headline, another late-night joke at his expense, the kind that didn't see a man, just a punchline. He put the paper down, stared for a long moment, and then looked at Jerry with eyes that were suddenly very young. "Jer, be honest with me, you think they're laughing at me now?" It wasn't the question of a king. It was the question of a friend whose heart was tired. At the time, Jerry did what he thought a loyal friend should do. He brushed it off. He told Elvis people were jealous, that the papers didn't know what they were talking about, that he was still the greatest entertainer in the world. And some of that was true. But not all of it. What he didn't say that night still haunts him. He didn't say that the lies weren't just out there in the world. They were closing in from all sides. From the tabloids, from the business, from people who said they loved him, and sometimes, in the worst way, even from the men standing in the same room. Including Jerry himself. Because loyalty, Jerry would later realize, can be twisted into silence, and silence can feel a lot like a lie. At 70, looking back across a lifetime of backstage doors and rolled-up hotel carpets, Jerry finally decided to do the one thing he hadn't done enough when Elvis was alive. Tell the truth. Not to tear down the legend, but to protect the man behind it. This is Jerry's confession about the lies that broke Elvis's spirit, how they started small and necessary, and how one of them, spoken in a room Jerry still dreams about, was something Elvis never fully recovered from. And to understand how they got there, you have to start with a young kid from Memphis who just wanted a job and ended up watching his hero slowly disappear behind other people's stories. Jerry never expected to be part of Elvis Presley's life. He was just a boy from Memphis, the kind who grew up hearing the same names, walking the same streets, feeling the same restless pull in the southern air. Elvis, in those early days, wasn't a god. He was this unbelievable, almost impossible rumor that somehow turned out to be real, a local boy who had walked out of the neighborhood and straight into history. The first time Jerry saw him up close, it wasn't with fireworks and stadium lights. It was more ordinary than that. Elvis was leaving a building, moving quickly with that strange mix of shyness and swagger that never quite left him. For Jerry, everything felt like slow motion. The hair, the clothes, the way people reacted just to the sight of him. He wasn't watching a star. He was watching a person carry the weight of something much bigger than himself. Years later, after a few chance meetings and a lot of time on the sidelines, Jerry found himself invited into the inner circle. At first, it barely felt real. One day he was a kid who idolized this man on records and movie screens. The next, he was climbing into cars with him, staying up all night in darkened rooms watching films, listening to Elvis talk about everything from music to faith to his mother. The Memphis Mafia, people called them. To some outsiders they looked like hangers-on or party boys, but inside those private worlds, the truth was more complicated. There was laughter, sure, pranks, late-night drives, crazy spending, but there was also a kind of fragile, desperate normalcy Elvis was constantly reaching for. He didn't just want fans around him. He wanted people who knew the difference between Elvis the phenomenon and Elvis the man. Jerry, somehow, became one of those people. The unspoken rule in that world was simple: protect him. Protect him from strangers. Protect him from crowds. Protect him from people who saw dollar signs instead of a human being. And when the press started twisting stories, inventing affairs, mocking his accent or his clothes, that rule grew another layer. Protect him from the truth he doesn't need to hear. At first, it seemed harmless. There were the staged dates dreamed up by publicists, the softened answers in magazine interviews, The little jokes they made about headlines that painted Elvis as dangerous, wild, or ridiculous. Elvis would wave them off, grin that crooked grin, and say, "Long as they keep talkin', long as they keep talkin'." But Jerry noticed the way Elvis's eyes lingered on certain lines, the way his fingers held the paper just a little too tightly, the way, after everyone laughed, he sometimes got very quiet. They told themselves they were protecting him. What good would it do for him to hear every nasty comment, every whisper about his weight, his love life, his career being over? Better to filter it, smooth it, spin it. That's how the first lies slipped in. Not the big, ugly ones, the small ones, the kind you can excuse. No, they didn't mean it that way. No, nobody saying that about you. No, it's not that bad. You're reading too much into it. Around them, the machine kept growing. Colonel Parker pushed for more shows, more contracts, more deals that sometimes felt less like opportunities and more like chains. Scripts slid across tables. Tour schedules lengthened. Lawyers and businessmen began speaking in a language that didn't sound like rock and roll anymore. It sounded like an inventory list. To the outside world, Elvis was still on top. To Jerry, it was clear something was shifting. Elvis was less a person everyone cared about and more a product no one wanted to stop selling. And with that shift came a new kind of lie. "Everything's fine, E. You're in control, all this is for you." Jerry heard those words over and over again. Sometimes he said them himself. There were moments when Elvis would look around after a meeting and ask the question no one in the room wanted to deal with. "You sure this is good for me, man? Not just good for business?" The room would always respond the same way. Smiles, nods, reassurances. Jerry would feel something twist in his chest because there were deals that felt wrong. There were commitments that pushed Elvis past exhaustion. There were decisions that seemed to value the show more than the person under the spotlight. But who was he to challenge it? He was the kid who'd been given the chance to sit next to his hero, to travel with him, to see what no one else saw. He wasn't a manager. He wasn't a lawyer. He was one of the boys. So he swallowed his doubts and stayed quiet. One night, he watched a conversation that still makes his stomach turn, even decades later. They were sitting around going over yet another series of performances, another commitment that would keep Elvis on stage night after night when his body clearly needed rest. Elvis hesitated, just for a second. "I don't know, fellas, I'm tired, I don't feel right lately." Before Jerry could speak, someone else jumped in, someone with power, someone whose voice carried weight in those rooms. "You're just worn out from all the work, that's all. It's good for you, the people love you, we've already told them you're coming, you'll be fine." The words were smooth, easy, they sounded like love, they sounded like faith. Elvis looked over at Jerry. It was a small glance, a half-second really, but in that half-second, Elvis was asking for something simple. Is he telling me the truth? Jerry knew what he felt in his gut. He knew Elvis needed rest more than he needed another contract. He knew something about this didn't sit right. He even opened his mouth. And then he shut it. He gave Elvis the tiniest nod, the kind you give when you're trying to keep the peace. Later, Jerry would tell himself it wasn't his place, that these were grown men making grown men's decisions, that it wasn't his job to fight battles Elvis himself didn't want to start. He repeated that to himself so many times it almost felt true. Almost. There were other, quieter moments that hurt just as much. After a show one night, Elvis asked him, "How was I really?" It wasn't a casual question. His voice didn't have that playful bounce. He was fishing for something deeper, something real. Jerry thought about the parts of the performance that showed how exhausted Elvis was. The missed notes he'd never missed before, the strain in his breathing, the way he had to push his body through the set list like he was dragging it uphill. But he saw how vulnerable Elvis looked, how much he'd already given that night. "You were great, Jerry said. "They loved you." Elvis smiled, but his eyes didn't fully light up. "Yeah," he said quietly, "but did you?" That's the thing no one tells you about lies. They don't always explode. Sometimes they just sit there between two people, a thin, invisible wall where trust used to be. Elvis needed someone who would love him enough to tell him uncomfortable truths. Jerry wanted to be that person, but he kept choosing the softer answer, the safer path. The rule had always been, protect Elvis at all costs. What Jerry didn't realize back then was that protecting someone's image while ignoring their pain isn't protection at all. It's surrender. Looking back at those early years from the distance of 70, Jerry can see the cracks forming long before the world saw any collapse. Little compromises, little silences, moments when he could have spoken up and didn't. He thought loyalty meant standing by the decisions made in those rooms. He didn't yet understand that sometimes the bravest act of loyalty is saying, "This is wrong," even when you're the only one in the room who feels it. That night when Elvis looked to him for confirmation and Jerry stayed quiet, something shifted. It was a small shift, the kind you can only recognize in hindsight. But for Jerry, it marked the first time he clearly chose the comfort of the circle over the well-being of the man at its center. And the lies were only just beginning. Because very soon, the stories being told about Elvis wouldn't just be in boardrooms and backrooms. They'd be on magazine covers, in headlines, in jokes broadcast to millions. The world would start deciding who Elvis Presley was without ever asking the man himself. And Jerry would have to decide, again and again, whose truth he was willing to stand up for. There's a moment in every story where the fun stops feeling like fun. For Elvis, it didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a single night or a single headline. It was a slow tightening, like a belt pulled one notch at a time, until suddenly you can't breathe and don't remember when it started. For Jerry, the shift became clear in the years when the laughs in the dressing room got a little quieter, and the schedule taped to the wall got a lot longer. The early Graceland nights, the movies till dawn, the wild road trips, the feeling that they were all living in some impossible dream began to give way to something heavier. The calls from the Colonel were more frequent. The talk of contracts and percentages got louder, and the words, "We can't say no to this," started showing up in conversations more than anyone wanted to admit. Elvis was still the center of everything. He still walked into a room and changed the air. But he was no longer just a young man with a guitar who could shake the world with a song. He was a machine that had to keep running. Jerry watched that change from closer than most. He saw how the tour grew more intense, how the movie schedules overlapped, how Vegas locked itself around Elvis like a glittering cage. At first, everybody around him called it opportunity. "Can you believe this, Jer?" Elvis would say, holding another offer letter, another proposal, another residency. "Boy like me from Tupelo, and they still want more." There was pride in his voice, gratitude that never completely went away. But underneath, Jerry could see something else growing too. Pressure. The kind that made it harder for Elvis to say no, even on the days when his body begged for it. The lies that came with it didn't look like lies at first. They sounded like encouragement. "You're fine, E. You've done this 1,000 times. Nobody sings like you. They need you out there." The first time Jerry heard someone talk about Elvis like he was a product instead of a person, it was in a hotel suite he remembers to this day. Elvis wasn't even in the room. It was a business talk, an adult conversation. Men with paperwork and briefcases leaning over coffee tables, moving dates around like puzzle pieces. One of them said it so casually Jerry almost missed it. "If we can keep him on the road another year at this level, we're set. The demand's there, we just have to keep him going." Keep him going. Like a car, like a show, like a thing. Jerry stood off to the side, invisible, listening. Part of him wanted to step in and remind them Elvis was a man with a heart and bones and limits. But he stayed where he was, hands in his pockets, the loyal friend not wanting to overstep. Later that night, Elvis was the one reassuring them. "Don't worry, I can do it. The fans come, I show up. That's the deal, isn't it? He said it with a smile, but when everyone left, when the door finally closed, he sat down slowly, like each movement hurt more than he let on. You know what they don't write about, Elvis said, eyes on the carpet. The nights you can't sleep from the pain, but they still expect you to go out there and be Superman. Jerry didn't know what to say. He'd heard those same men talk about Elvis like he was indestructible. He'd heard them brush off the concerns with that same old line. He's a strong boy, he'll be fine. It was a lie, a comfortable one, a profitable one. And everyone around Elvis kept telling it. As the years went on, another layer of lies wrapped itself around him, this time from the outside world. The tabloids that once excited him, that once made him laugh, turned uglier. Photos of him at unflattering angles. Headlines that sneered at his weight, his outfits, his private life. Is Elvis finished? Elvis Presley, tragic parody of himself. They didn't see the man waking up stiff and exhausted, trying to swallow pills just to get his body to cooperate. They saw an easy target, a legend who had stayed in the game long enough to become something they could tear down for sport. Sometimes the papers would arrive folded neatly. Someone would place them on a table or chair like they were delivering a bomb they didn't want to touch. Jerry noticed that too. Elvis would pretend not to care. He'd flip through them quickly, shake his head, make a joke. They've been saying, I'm finished, since the first time I shook my leg on TV, he'd say. If I'd listened back then, I'd still be stocking shelves. But Jerry could also tell which lines stuck like splinters. Long after the conversation moved on, Elvis would circle back to something a critic had written, some cruel phrase tossed onto a page by someone who'd never been under those lights. Out-of-shape caricature, Elvis would repeat quietly later when the room was half empty. That's something, huh? Jerry would rush in with all the usual defenses. They don't know nothing. They couldn't do one night of what you do. You heard that crowd tonight. You still own every person in that room. Those things were true, they just weren't the whole truth. Because Jerry had also seen the way Elvis leaned against a dressing room counter, catching his breath between songs. He'd watched him down medications just to get through the set. He'd heard the doctor's concerns, spoken in careful tones that were easy for other people to ignore when there were dates on the calendar. The problem wasn't that nobody knew. The problem was that nobody wanted to be the one to stop the machine. Even among the inner circle, lies crept in like a slow fog. Whispers about money, about loyalty, about who was really on Elvis's side. A comment here, a suggestion there. You know he's only around because of the checks, right? She's not good for you, she's just here for the name. He said something about you the other night. I didn't want to repeat it, but those half-truths and twisted stories did more damage than any newspaper headline. They made Elvis question the people closest to him. They turned small disagreements into deep cracks. And the worst part for Jerry was knowing that sometimes those whispers came from people who claimed they were just being honest. Honesty, when it's laced with malice, is just another way to lie. He watched friendships fray, watched trust wear thin. There were nights when someone would leave the room and Elvis would turn to Jerry and ask the kind of question that broke his heart. You think he really loves me, Jer, or is he just here for the ride? What do you say to a man who has given the world everything and still doesn't know who's there for him? Jerry wanted to scream the truth some nights, that the fame had twisted everything, that some people were there for the money, the power, the access, that some were clinging to him because they didn't know who they'd be without him. But he'd also seen those same people pick Elvis up off the floor, sit with him on the worst days, shield him from strangers who wanted a piece. It wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. Nobody around him was all villain or all saint. So Jerry did what he always did. He tried to find the softest version of the truth. Some people handle being close to you better than others, he'd say carefully, but you got folks who love you, you know that. He meant it. But he also knew it wasn't enough anymore. Because the lies had moved inside Elvis now. They weren't just headlines he could throw away or rumors he could outrun. They'd become voices in his own head. He started making jokes at his own expense, about his weight, about his age, about being a relic in a world chasing newer, flashier stars. If I weren't Elvis Presley, he'd say sometimes, half smiling, they wouldn't let me do this anymore. Everyone in the room would rush to disagree. Don't say that. Come on, you're the king. But Jerry heard the crack in his voice. The way that sentence didn't sound like a joke, it sounded like resignation. Through all of this, another lie was being told again and again, maybe the most dangerous one of all. You're okay. When Elvis said he was tired, they told him he'd get his second wind. When he said he felt like something was wrong, they told him it was just stress. When he struggled to catch his breath, they told him nerves played tricks on you, that he'd feel better once he hit the stage. It was easier to tell themselves that than to confront what it might mean if he was okay, if the machine had broken the man running it. Jerry remembers one doctor's warning, serious and clear, about needing to slow down, about needing to change things before it was too late. He remembers how fast the conversation was softened as it passed through the filters of managers and promoters. By the time it reached Elvis, it sounded more like a suggestion than a lifeline. Just take it easy when you can, you'll be fine. He wasn't fine. Jerry could see it in the way Elvis walked, how he carried himself, how the light in his eyes flickered more than it used to. But every time someone had the chance to say, stop, they chose one more show. Every time there was a crossroads between the man and the myth won. The pressure didn't just come from above. It came from the crowd, too. From the roar that still met him every night, from the fans who still lined up outside in the heat, in the rain, holding records and posters and pieces of their own lives they'd attached to his music. How do I tell them no? Elvis asked Jerry once, staring out a window at a crowd that had waited hours just to wave at a moving car. How do I say, I'm too tired to be their Elvis tonight? They didn't get tired of me. I don't get tired of them. He meant it. That was the trouble. His love for his fans, his sense of duty to them, pulled him further into the same trap. Every time his body begged him to stop, his heart answered with, just one more time. And every time he did, the people around him got more proof that the lie was working. See, he can handle it. He was just being dramatic. Jerry started to realize that he wasn't just watching a dangerous pattern, he was participating in it. When Elvis asked if he was overreacting, Jerry would assure him he was. When Elvis said he was scared of being forgotten, Jerry would tell him the world would never let that happen. Both things came from love, but Jerry began to understand that love without truth is a house built on sand. And somewhere in the middle of that long slide came the question that drew a line Jerry can never uncross. It was after a run of shows that had pushed Elvis past every reasonable limit. The lights, the crowds, the strain, it was all written on his face. Back in a quiet room afterward, the noise of the arena still buzzing in the walls, Elvis sat down slowly, like the weight of the suit alone was too much. He didn't say anything for a long time. Jerry started to speak, to offer the same words he'd always used to patch these moments up. You were great tonight, crowd loved you. Elvis looked at him, and this time he didn't smile, didn't brush off the pain with a joke. His voice was barely above a whisper when he asked it. Tell me the truth, Jerry, am I a joke to them now? There it was, not dressed up, not hidden, just raw, vulnerable, hanging in the air like a final exam all the lies had been building toward. He wasn't asking about critics, he wasn't asking about promoters or managers, he was asking about the people in the seats, the world, the machine, all of it. He was asking whether the man inside the glitter had become the very thing he'd always feared most, a spectacle. Jerry felt every answer fighting in his chest. He wanted to say no, absolutely not, don't be ridiculous. He wanted to tell him that people still cried when he sang, that they still clutched their hearts when he hit a note, that he could still silence a room with a single look. All of that was true. But the other truth was there too, ugly and undeniable. There were people laughing. There were commentators and writers and strangers watching him through a cruel lens. There were jokes being made at his expense in living rooms across the country. And Elvis somehow could feel it. Jerry looked at his friend, at the man who had given him the adventure of a lifetime, the man he loved like family, and he froze. He told himself he was protecting him when he answered. "No," he said softly, "they don't see you as a joke. They still love you. You're Elvis Presley." Elvis held his gaze for a long second, as if he were trying to hear what Jerry wasn't saying. Then he nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "that's what they keep telling me." He said it like someone repeating a line they no longer quite believe. Jerry didn't know it then, but that question would replay in his mind for years afterward. Not because of what Elvis asked, but because of what Jerry couldn't bring himself to answer honestly. Because if a man can't get the full truth from the people closest to him, where is he supposed to find it? The lies around Elvis had become a storm. The lies inside him were starting to become a prison. And there was still one night coming, one private, unguarded conversation, when all of those lies would collide in a way that Jerry would spend the rest of his life replaying. Wishing with everything in him that he had spoken differently. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like something breaking. Jerry remembers that silence more clearly than the sound of any screaming crowd. Not the roar of Vegas, not the flashbulbs, not the applause that used to shake the walls. What he remembers is the quiet in a room where Elvis Presley finally stopped pretending that everything was okay. It didn't look like the dramatic collapse people imagine. There was no scene, no thrown glass, no shouted speech. It was late, the way it always was. Another run of shows behind them. Another night of Elvis giving more than his body had any right to give. The house was mostly empty. A few of the guys had drifted off. The noise of the world felt far away for once. It was just Elvis and Jerry, the clock crawling toward a time when most people are asleep and most truths slip out before you can catch them. Elvis was still in partial stage gear, like he hadn't fully climbed out of the character the world needed him to be. He lowered himself into a chair, slower than a man his age should, like every joint was a reminder of all the nights he'd pushed past the limit. For a while, neither of them spoke. Jerry, by habit, tried to fill the silence. "Crowd was wild tonight," he said. "You had 'em from the first note." Elvis didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just stared at a spot on the floor for a long time, like he was looking through it. "Jer," he said quietly, "can I ask you something, and I need you not to lie to me." He'd never said it that way before, not to Jerry. That one line hit harder than any review, any headline, any whisper in any hallway, because wrapped inside, it was the unspoken truth. Elvis wasn't sure anymore where the real answers were. He'd been fed so many versions of "you're fine" and "everything's okay" that he didn't know who still had the courage to tell him what he didn't want to hear. Jerry's throat tightened. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, you can ask me anything." Elvis leaned back, eyes still on that invisible point in the room. "Do you ever feel like they don't see me no more?" he asked. "Like they only see whatever story they've made up in their heads, the hero, the sinner, the joke, whatever it is that day?" Jerry started to answer, but Elvis kept going. "I go out there and I hear 'em," he said. "I feel 'em, that part's real. But then I come back here and I read what they write, I hear what they say, and I don't know which man they're talking about, 'cause it sure ain't the one sittin' in this room right now." He paused, like he was waiting to see if Jerry would fill in the blanks. Instead, Jerry just listened. "I've been lied to about so many things, Jer," Elvis said. "Money, deals, folks saying they're looking out for me while they sign my name to papers I never saw. Got people telling me I'm healthy when I can barely walk up a damn flight of stairs." His voice cracked a little on that line, not with anger, but with something worse, humiliation. And then out there, he continued, they tell lies about me like I ain't even a person, like I ain't got a daughter, a daddy, a heart. They make jokes about the way I look, the way I live, like I don't go home and hear that in my head when the lights go off. He looked up at Jerry then, eyes tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. You want to know the worst lie? Elvis asked, the one that hurts the most. Jerry could feel it coming, the core of everything he'd been watching build for years, but he said nothing. There was nothing to say until Elvis put it into words. It's when they tell me, Elvis whispered, you're all you got left. The room felt smaller after that sentence. What do you mean? Jerry asked, even though he knew. They tell me nobody understands me but the show, Elvis said, that if I stop, I lose everything, that the fans'll move on, that the money dries up, that the folks around me, well, they got lives too, don't they? They ain't sticking around for nothing. He shook his head, a sad little laugh slipping out. They tell me I'm loved, he said, but only as long as I keep Bane Elvis Presley. That was it. That was the lie. Not the one in the papers, not the ones in the contracts, the one someone, somewhere along the way, had planted in his chest, that his worth began and ended with the man on stage, that if he ever put the microphone down and walked away, there'd be nothing left but a quiet house and a name that used to mean something. Jerry felt sick hearing it spoken out loud, because he recognized pieces of his own behavior in that story. How many times had he said, they need you, when what he really meant was, I don't know who we are without you out there. How many times had he reassured Elvis that the show had to go on because the alternative was too frightening to imagine. You're not just the show, Jerry said finally, his voice low. You know that. Elvis smiled, but it was the kind of smile people use when they've already made up their mind and they're just sparing you the argument. Maybe, he said, but tell me something, Jer, be honest. If I'd walked away 10 years ago, if I'd gone and disappeared on some little farm somewhere, how many of the people in this house you think would have come with me? Jerry opened his mouth, closed it again. He thought about all the faces that had come and gone, the ones who were there for the fun, for the perks, for the energy, the ones who said they'd die for Elvis but never seemed willing to let him live on his own terms. He wanted to say, all of us. He wanted to say, I would, you know I would. But the longer he sat there, the more that answer felt like another soft lie. Elvis watched his silence like it was the only thing in the room that mattered. That's what I thought, he said quietly. He wasn't angry, he wasn't yelling, he wasn't dramatic. He was defeated. That's what Jerry can't forgive himself for years later, not that Elvis asked the question, but that when he did, Jerry didn't have a clean, honest, hopeful answer ready. All the half-truths, all the protective lies, had left them both unprepared for this moment. Because here it was, stripped of the music and the lights and the business talk. Elvis Presley, the man, asking if anyone would still stand beside him if he stopped being Elvis Presley, the myth. Jerry tried to rally. I'm here, he said. I'm not going anywhere. Elvis nodded, but he looked past Jerry, beyond him, like he was seeing all the ways life had already proven otherwise. People who had left when things got hard. People who had taken what they wanted and moved on. People who had changed the story to suit themselves once they were outside the gates. You're here now, Elvis said softly, and I'm grateful. Don't think I don't know who stuck it out, but I also know how this goes, man. Folks love to tell stories about you after you're gone, and they always make themselves look better in 'em. It was a strangely calm thing to say, but it cut Jerry to the bone. Because in that room, late that night, Elvis wasn't just talking about the lies that had brought him to this breaking point. He was already seeing the lies that would be told after he couldn't answer back. They'll say I didn't care about myself, Elvis murmured. They'll say I threw it all away. They'll say they tried to save me, but I wouldn't listen. You watch. They'll all be the hero in the story. Jerry didn't know what to do with that. He couldn't imagine a world without Elvis in it, much less a world picking apart the pieces of his life like a puzzle they had the right to solve. He wanted to argue, to tell Elvis he was being dramatic, that nobody who truly loved him would twist things like that. But he'd already seen what people were capable of when there was attention to be won, or money to be made, or guilt to be washed away in public. He reached for the one thing he still believed he could promise. "I won't let him do that to you," Jerry said, "not while I'm around." Elvis gave him a long look. "Then you tell the truth when it's time," he said, "not just the pretty parts." Those words lodged themselves somewhere deep inside Jerry that night. He didn't understand then how heavy they would feel later, when Elvis was gone and the stories began multiplying. How hard it would be to balance love and honesty when the cameras turned on and everyone had their own version of who Elvis was and what had really happened to him. All he knew in that moment was that the man in front of him, the friend he'd followed across continents and through chaos, was tired in a way that had nothing to do with hours slept. His spirit was worn down by years of people lying to him for his own good, lying about him for their own gain, and worst of all, teaching him to lie to himself about what he deserved. He deserved rest, he deserved gentleness, he deserved the truth. Instead, he got a mask he couldn't take off without feeling like he'd vanish with it. In the days and months that followed, Jerry watched the quiet resignation settle into Elvis's routines. The machine kept moving, the dates kept stacking up, the pills kept coming, the laughs still happened, the music still soared, but behind it all was that same question hanging in the air. If I stop being what they want me to be, will there be anything left of me at all? When Elvis died, the world reacted like the sun had fallen out of the sky. Fans wept, newscasters choked up, strangers who had never met him spoke about him like they'd lost someone from their own family. But almost before the ground had settled, the stories began. Books, interviews, specials, confessions, people stepping forward to say what they really knew about Elvis Presley, some with love, some with bitterness, some with a careful polish that just happened to leave them looking noble and blameless. Jerry stood in the middle of that storm, hearing echoes of that late-night conversation. They'll all be the hero in the story. And he realized something that hit him harder than any headline ever had. The lies hadn't stopped with Elvis's last breath. In some ways, they were only getting started. And if he was going to keep the promise he'd made in that quiet room, to tell the truth when it was time, then at 70 years old, he would have to do the hardest thing of all. Speak honestly, not just about what the world did to Elvis, but about what the people closest to him, including Jerry himself, allowed to happen. And what they said about him once he was no longer here to answer back. In the years after Elvis died, the world did exactly what he said it would. It told stories. They came fast: books, interviews, TV specials, magazine covers. Some were written with love, some with curiosity, some with greed. Some people cried on camera. Some people casually revealed details that had once been guarded like state secrets. And almost every version had one thing in common. The person talking found a way to come out clean. Jerry watched as people who had never stepped foot inside Graceland spoke with absolute certainty about Elvis's heart, his addictions, his decisions. He listened to others, people who had been there, reshape events in small but important ways. Arguments that had three sides became stories with only one villain, and it was almost never the person doing the talking. Everyone was the one who tried to help. Everyone was the voice of reason. Everyone somehow was trying to save Elvis. But Elvis wasn't there to say, "That's not how it happened." For a long time, Jerry chose the safest path he knew. He stayed mostly quiet. He did interviews, yes, but carefully. He shared the good memories, the funny ones, the stories that made people smile and kept the legend shining: road trip antics, music sessions, the way Elvis would light up talking about his mom or hold a fan's hand like there was nothing else in the world. He thought he was honoring his friend by keeping the darkest moments tucked away, by not feeding the rumor mill, by refusing to turn his grief into someone else's entertainment. But as the years went on, something began to gnaw at him. The more the world repeated the same shallow version of Elvis, the reckless superstar, the man who couldn't handle fame, the punchline about jumpsuits and peanut butter sandwiches, the more the real person he'd known started to disappear behind the noise. It wasn't just that people were lying about what Elvis did. It was that they were lying about who he was. They forgot the gentle man who'd stop everything to listen to a fan's story about how a song saved their marriage. They forgot the insomniac reader devouring books about faith and philosophy. They forgot the shy, vulnerable soul who'd ask his closest friends, "Was I okay tonight?" like a kid asking for reassurance after a school recital. It was easier to remember the tragic ending than the complicated, beautiful journey it came from. At 70, Jerry felt the weight of two kinds of regret. The first was personal, all the nights he hadn't spoken up, all the truths he'd softened, all the times he'd told Elvis, "You're fine," when he knew the man needed someone to say, "You're not fine, and I'm going to fight for you anyway." The second was public, realizing that by staying quiet afterward, by avoiding the mess, he'd also allowed other people's versions to harden into fact. Elvis had asked him, in that late-night conversation, to tell the truth when the time came, not just the pretty parts, not just the stories that made good posters and documentaries. And the time, Jerry finally admitted to himself, was running out. So he began to talk differently. Not to tear anyone down, not to score points in old arguments, but to say out loud what he'd carried quietly for decades. That Elvis Presley did not self-destruct in a vacuum. He was pushed, pulled, packaged, and sold. He was lied to about his health, about his finances, about the cost of the treadmill he was forced to run on. He was fed a constant diet of half-truths and reassurances until he stopped trusting his own instincts. And yet, through all of it, he loved. He loved his daughter, he loved his parents, he loved his fans, he loved the idea that his music could reach somebody sitting alone in a room the way other people's songs once reached him. Jerry wanted people to understand that the man who died in that house in Memphis wasn't just a fallen idol. He was a human being who'd been carrying expectations no one person should ever have to carry. When Jerry spoke about the lies now, he didn't do it to paint Elvis as a helpless victim. He did it to restore his humanity. Because it matters that Elvis cared deeply about the people around him, even as they failed him. It matters that he wrestled with guilt for not being able to be everything to everyone. It matters that behind the myth of the king was a sensitive, often lonely soul who never stopped searching for real connection in a world that mostly wanted his reflection. It matters because this isn't just his story. Jerry looks at the world today, at how fast rumors spread, at how quickly we turn people into heroes or villains based on a single clip or headline, and he sees the same patterns that helped break Elvis's spirit. We still reward the loudest story, not the truest one. We still forget that behind every famous name is someone's son, someone's parent, someone's friend staring at a ceiling late at night with the same fears everyone else has. Am I enough? Am I loved for who I am, or just for what I give? That's why when Jerry talks now, he doesn't only talk about what other people did wrong. He talks about himself. He admits that he stayed quiet when he should have raised hell. He admits that sometimes he chose the comfort of the group over the hard, lonely work of telling a friend, "This has to stop." He admits that even love can be cowardly if it never risks the discomfort of truth. In doing that, he's making a different kind of statement about Elvis's legacy. He's saying that if you really love someone's memory, if you truly care about honoring them, you don't just freeze them in a poster or a title. You examine your own part in their story. You ask what you could have done differently. You tell the full story, even when it hurts you too. In a way, that's the final twist in all of this. The lies broke Elvis's spirit while he was alive. But the truth, late, painful, imperfect, might be the only thing that can protect his spirit now. Talking this way doesn't change what happened in those final years. It doesn't bring back all the nights Jerry wishes he'd said, "No more, we're done, we're walking away from this." It doesn't give Elvis the rest he was denied when he needed it most. What it does do is refuse to let the world keep using his name as a lazy shortcut for tragedy or excess, without also acknowledging his tenderness, his generosity, and the ways other people failed him. It refuses to let the people who surrounded him, friends, family, business partners, even well-meaning companions, hide behind a simple, comforting narrative that he alone was to blame. At 70, when Jerry sits down with fans or interviewers, he often ends up circling back to the same simple idea. We have to love our heroes better. Not by worshipping them, not by pretending they never made mistakes, but by remembering they are human first and famous second, by understanding that they can be strong on stage and fragile in private, by refusing to join in when the world starts turning their pain into entertainment. He knows he can't control what anyone else says about Elvis. The books will keep coming, the think pieces will keep appearing, the jokes will probably never fully stop. But he can, with whatever years he has left, offer something Elvis asked him for in that dark, quiet room. A story that doesn't lie to make anyone look good. A story that says, this is how we loved him, this is how we failed him, this is what he carried, this is who he really was. And then he leaves the rest to the people who loved Elvis from afar all their lives, the ones who never stepped into those private rooms, but felt the truth of the man anyway in his voice, his songs, his eyes. Because maybe, in the end, that's who his legacy really belongs to. Not the ones who profited from his image. Not the ones who only showed up to tell their version of the story once he was gone. But the ones who still listen, all these years later, and hear not just a legend, but a human being crying out from behind all the noise, wanting to be seen and understood. If the world had loved Elvis more gently, if the people closest to him had told him the hard truths sooner, would his story have ended differently? We'll never know. But we can decide, right now, what we do with that question, and how we treat the next person we attempted to turn into either a god or a joke. If you've stayed with this story all the way here, it means Elvis is more to you than a headline or a costume. So I want to ask you, how do you see him now? Was he failed by the people and the machine around him, or do you believe he still found some kind of peace? Share your thoughts in the comments, tap like if this touched you, and subscribe if you want more untold truths from inside Elvis's world.